The air in Queens was thick with the stench of asphalt and motor oil, a familiar kind of perfume to Emily Lane, as she bent under the hood of a rusted Chevy Impala. The garage, a squat brick building on 43rd Avenue, buzzed with the clatter of tools and the low hum of Springsteen on the radio. Her hands, slick with grease, moved with the precision of a surgeon, breathing life back into a carburetor that had long since given up the ghost. At 24, Emily was a shadow of the prodigy she once was, a top mechanical engineering student at Riverside Institute of Technology, one of the most prestigious schools in the country. That was before her father got swindled, leaving behind a mountain of debt that forced her to trade lecture halls for grease-stained floors. That Chevy done yet?" Tommy, the garage owner, called from the office. His voice was gruff, but kind, the only one around here that didn't carry a trace of pity. "5 more minutes," she shouted back, wiping sweat from her brow with the back of her hand. She tightened a bolt, her fingers dancing across the engine like a pianist on a Steinway. The work was honest, but the pay barely made a dent in her father's $80,000 debt. Nights were for studying, hunched over frayed Riverside textbooks, chasing a dream she wasn't even sure she believed in anymore. The garage bell jingled, and a man in a tailored suit stepped inside, looking as out of place as a peacock in a junkyard. He adjusted his tie, eyes scanning the room until they landed on Emily. "You Lane?" he asked curtly. She straightened, squinting at him. "Who's asking?" "Vale Motors," he said, flashing a clipboard. "We need a prototype engine delivered to the convention center. Today. Tommy said you're handling it." Emily's stomach clenched. Vale Motors was a giant in the auto industry, known for its cutting-edge tech, and a CEO who had graduated from Riverside just a year before she started. She'd seen their ads, sleek cars, promises of a greener future, the kind of place she used to dream of working. Now she was just the delivery girl. "Fine," she said, wiping her hands on her coveralls. "Where's the engine?" The man pointed to a wooden crate in the corner, already loaded onto a dolly. "Be at the Marriott Marquis before 2. Don't be late, and maybe clean up a little." His nose wrinkled as he eyed her grimy sleeve. Emily swallowed a retort. "I'll get it there," she said flatly. He didn't need to know she had no intention of cleaning up for a room full of polished suits who'd look straight through her. The Marriott Marquis ballroom was a different universe. Crystal chandeliers cast golden light on glossy floors, and the air buzzed with chatter from industry bigwigs in tailored suits. Emily pushed the crate through the crowd, her grease-stained jumpsuit drawing side eyes from champagne-clutching men. She felt like a smudge on a pristine window, but kept her chin up, steering toward the stage where the Vale Motors logo shimmered. A man in his 30s stood at the podium, commanding the room with the ease of someone born for it. Damon Vale, CEO of Vale Motors, looked just like his magazine photos, square-jawed, slicked-back black hair, eyes like thunderclouds ready to strike. He was speaking, pitching the prototype engine as the future of sustainable energy. Emily parked the crate near the stage and backed into the shadows. As Damon wrapped up his speech, a Vale Motors engineer in a polo shirt rushed over. "You the delivery girl?" he whispered. She nodded. "Good. Open the crate and mount it. Fast." Emily hesitated. "I'm just here to deliver." The engineer's face tightened. "You want to tell the boss we're behind schedule because you don't know how to tighten a bolt?" She gritted her teeth, then knelt beside the crate. The crowd's attention was still on Damon, giving her a moment to work unnoticed. The engine was a masterpiece, sleek lines, hybrid tech, a marvel of design. But as she hoisted it onto the display mount, her fingers brushed a loose manifold. She frowned, checking the joints. A gasket was misaligned, and the fuel line had a hairline crack. Amateur mistakes. Fire hazard if started. She glanced around. The engineer was busy, and Damon was fielding questions. No one was watching. She pulled a multi-tool from her pocket and began tightening the manifold, her hands moving on instinct. The fuel line crack was more serious. She needed sealant or a replacement tube to make it safe. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" a sharp voice snapped. Emily froze, looking up to see Damon Vale towering over her. His eyes narrowed, sweeping from her greasy coveralls to the tool in her hand. The room quieted, conversations dropping off as eyes turned toward them. "Fixing your engine," she said calmly, though her throat burned. The gasket's off and the fuel line's cracked. Start it like this and you'll have a fire. A ripple of whispers spread through the crowd. Damon's face darkened. You're saying my team missed that? Who the hell are you? Emily Lane, I delivered the engine. She stood up, meeting his gaze. And yes, they missed it. Gasps, then silence. Damon stepped closer, voice low and blade sharp. You're a delivery girl. You don't touch my prototype. You don't speak unless spoken to. Emily's blood boiled. She'd heard that tone before from professors who doubted her, from lenders who sneered at her father. She raised the multi-tool, pointing to the engine. Check for yourself. Loose manifold and the fuel line's a disaster. I'm not wrong. Damon's jaw clenched. He glanced at the now pale engineer, then back at Emily. Fine, he said coldly. Show me. The crowd pressed closer, curiosity and skepticism thick in the air. Emily knelt again, pointing to the misaligned gasket and the faint crack. Here, she said, tapping the fuel line. Pressure test it, you'll see. It's already leaking. Damon crouched beside her, his cologne sharp against the metal tang of the engine. He examined the line, fingers brushing the crack. For a moment his expression shifted surprise, maybe, or something close. Then it hardened again. Lucky guess, he said, standing, but don't think that makes you an engineer. His words cut, but Emily didn't flinch. I don't need your validation to know what I'm doing. A ripple of laughter broke the tension, but Damon's eyes stayed locked on her. He turned to the crowd, voice loud and smooth. Looks like our delivery girl's got a bit of skill. Let's see if she can handle the heat. Applause followed, many thinking it was part of the show. Emily's hand curled into a fist. She hadn't come to be anyone's entertainment. But as she met Damon's gaze, something unspoken passed between them, a challenge, a spark, a line drawn in the sand. She would show him. She would show them all. You're watching Soul Stories, where every tale whispers of love, healing, and hope. If you believe that even the smallest act of kindness can change a life, and that love often arrives when we least expect it, don't forget to subscribe and be part of our journey. Now stay with us. The story is just beginning. The ballroom of the Marriott Marcus still echoed with applause, but Emily could feel the eyes on her, part curiosity, part condescension. Damon Vale stood tall on stage, the chandelier's light glinting in his cold, sharp eyes. His words, "Let's see if she can handle it," still hung in the air like a gauntlet thrown. Emily gripped the multi-tool in her hand, her pride flaring like the fire she'd just warned about in the engine. All right, Miss Lane, Damon said, his voice smooth but laced with mockery. He stepped down from the podium and walked toward her, the crowd parting instinctively to make way. You think you're smarter than my engineering team? Then prove it. He pointed to the prototype engine on display. If you're as good as you say, fix it, right now, in front of everyone. A murmur rippled through the crowd. Investors in custom suits, engineers with gleaming name tags, even reporters raising their cameras, all waiting to see how this grease-stained girl would fail. Emily looked at the engine, then back at Damon. He was playing a game of chess, and she was the pawn being pushed to the front lines. I need tools, she said calmly, though her heart pounded. A new fuel hose, high-pressure sealant, and a torque wrench. Damon raised an eyebrow, but the corner of his mouth twitched as if he was enjoying the show. Give her what she needs, he ordered the nearby engineer, who now looked like he wanted to disappear into the floor. The engineer rushed off and returned a few minutes later with a toolbox and a fresh coil of hose. Emily knelt beside the engine, acutely aware of the dozens of eyes watching her every move. She wasn't a stranger to pressure, the long nights at Tommy's garage with irate customers breathing down her neck, or the exams at Riverside where she had to prove she wasn't just the only girl in the room. But this was different. This was a stage, and she had no room for error. She began removing the cracked fuel line, her fingers moving quickly but steadily. The crowd was silent now. The only sounds were the soft clicks of metal and her own quiet breathing. This hose isn't up to spec, she said, not looking up but speaking loud enough to be heard. The wall thickness is too thin for hybrid pressure. Someone chose the wrong material. She shot a glance at the engineer, who had gone red. Damon folded his arms, watching her like a hawk. Are you blaming my team? Not blaming, Emily replied, fitting the new hose in place. Just stating the facts. The design is impressive, but the quality control isn't. She applied a layer of high-pressure sealant, checked the fittings, and used the torque wrench to secure everything. Every motion was precise, like a dance she'd practiced 1,000 times. She stood, wiping her hands on her jumpsuit. Done. Start it up. It won't leak. Damon tilted his head, his eyes scanning from the engine to her and back. Confident, aren't you? He said, a tone somewhere between sarcasm and intrigue. He signaled to another engineer to start the engine. The motor purred to life, smooth and steady, no signs of overheating or leaks. A few scattered claps broke out, but most of the room remained stunned, as if unable to believe what they had just witnessed. Emily crossed her arms, mirroring Damon's stance. Told you I wasn't wrong. A flicker of a smile crossed Damon's lips, but it vanished as quickly as it came. He turned to the crowd and raised a hand for silence. Miss Lane here, he announced, voice echoing. Just fixed an engine my team, some of the best engineers in the field, overlooked. Perhaps we should applaud her, or her luck? Laughter rolled through the crowd, but it didn't shake Emily. She looked Damon straight in the eye, unwavering. He thought it was luck? Fine, she'd make him eat those words. But Damon wasn't finished. He stepped closer, lowering his voice just enough that only she could hear. You think you're special, Lane? I was a top student at Riverside, too. I know you're type cocky, but you crack under real pressure. He straightened, returning to his public tone. Thanks for delivering the engine. You can go now. Emily felt the flush of anger rise in her cheeks, but she held it in. She hadn't come here to argue with an arrogant CEO. She turned to leave, but a voice called out from the crowd, a reporter with a mic in hand. Miss Lane, where did you study? How does a delivery girl know how to fix an engine like that? She paused, glancing over her shoulder. Damon was watching her, waiting to see how she'd respond. She gave a faint smile, turned to face the crowd and said, I studied at Riverside. Senior year. But life doesn't always follow the plan. As for the engine, she pointed to the prototype. It doesn't care about degrees. It just needs someone who understands it. Another wave of whispers rippled through the room, this time tinged with admiration. Damon stood still, but Emily could see his jaw tighten. She didn't wait for his reply. She pushed the empty dolly out of the ballroom, head held high, the click of her boots and a few scattered claps echoing behind her. As the ballroom doors closed, Emily drew in a deep breath, her heart still racing. She knew this wasn't over. Damon Vale wasn't the type to let a challenge go unanswered, and she just painted a big red X on her back. But in that moment, under chandeliers and the scrutiny of dozens of eyes, she felt something she hadn't in a long time belief. Not in Damon, not in Vale Motors, but in herself. She wouldn't let them forget the name Emily Lane. Emily stepped out of the Marriott Marquis into the thick June air of Manhattan, a mix of exhaust fumes and coffee from a nearby street cart. The city's noise swallowed the pounding of her heart, still echoing from her confrontation with Damon Vale. She pushed the empty dolly toward the garage truck, trying to shake the image of his piercing eyes like he wanted to tear her apart, and yet couldn't look away. She'd done the unthinkable, fixed an engine in front of a room full of power players. Now she felt both exhilarated and uneasy. Just as she locked the truck, a voice called behind her. Miss Lane? Emily turned, startled to find Damon Vale standing just a few steps away, no longer on stage but on the sidewalk, still in his impeccable suit, though his gaze held less arrogance than before. Beside him was an older man with salt and pepper hair, wearing a jacket with the Vale Motors logo. Emily clenched her fists, bracing for another round of sparring. What now? She asked warily. Damon crossed his arms, studying her from head to toe, not with contempt this time, but like he was assessing something he hadn't figured out yet. You made an impression, he said evenly. Not many people talk back to me. Fewer still fix an engine my team missed. Emily raised an eyebrow. Really? I thought you said I just got lucky. The corner of Damon's mouth twitched, but he didn't smile. Maybe I underestimated you, or maybe you're just putting on a show. He tilted his head, eyes sharp. I want to be sure. Vale Motors needs people with skill, not showboats. She narrowed her eyes, something feeling off. What are you saying? A trial run, Damon replied. 7 days. Work at Vale Motors headquarters in Long Island. You'll be placed on the new engine development team. If you're as good as you think, prove it. If not, he shrugged. You'll go back to the garage and no one will ever mention the name Emily Lane again. Emily felt her cheeks flush. This was the chance, the kind she used to dream about back at Riverside, sketching designs late into the night. But the way Damon said it, like he was granting a favor, made her want to punch that smug face. And there was something else in his eyes, suspicion, like he was setting a trap and waiting for her to fall. The older man beside Damon spoke, his voice lower and more genuine. I'm Carl, chief engineer. I was in the room earlier. What you did with that engine, not many could have done it. We need people like you. He smiled, but Emily couldn't tell if it was sincere or just part of Damon's act. She looked from Carl to Damon, her thoughts racing. 7 days at Vale Motors could change everything, a step back toward her dream, a way to pay off her father's debt, a chance to prove she wasn't just the delivery girl, but she knew the cost. Working under Damon's scrutiny, in an environment ready to devour her if she slipped. I need time to think, she said, keeping her voice steady. Damon raised an eyebrow, clearly not used to being turned down. You have until tomorrow morning, 8 o'clock, Vale Motors. Don't show up. Don't regret it. He turned and walked away without waiting for her answer. Carl gave her a polite nod before following. Emily stood there, watching Damon's Bentley disappear into the traffic. She took a deep breath, trying to sort out the storm inside her. This was an opportunity, but it could just as easily be a trap. Damon didn't trust her, that much was obvious. He wanted her to fail, to prove she was just a flash in the pan. But she wasn't someone who quit. The next morning, Emily stood in front of the gleaming glass tower of Vale Motors in Long Island, her garage jumpsuit replaced with a navy blue shirt and clean jeans, the most professional outfit she owned. She'd called Tommy the night before to ask for the week off. Go for it, kid, he said, but be careful. Guys like Vale don't play fair. She stepped into the lobby, where polished marble floors reflected the chandeliers above, and the air smelled faintly of luxury cologne. The receptionist, a young woman with a tight-lipped smile, handed her a temporary badge. 5th floor, she said, her eyes briefly scanning Emily like she didn't belong. The 5th floor was a maze of labs and offices, filled with the sounds of machinery and the scent of heated metal. Carl met her at the door and led her past a group of engineers, all men who looked at her with curiosity and thinly veiled doubt. This is Emily Lane, Carl announced. She's here on a 1-week trial. Treat her like part of the team. One engineer, blonde with glasses, snorted. The girl who fixed the engine at the expo? Welcome to the real world, princess. Emily gave a faint, unimpressed smile. She was used to this. Guys at Riverside had called her princess too, until she beat them on every exam. She wouldn't let it get under her skin. Carl guided her to a small workstation in the corner of the lab, where a detailed blueprint of a new engine lay waiting. First task, he said, review this design. Spot any errors. We're about to send it to production. Emily nodded, sat down, and unfolded the schematic. It was no simple assignment. The engine was more complex than anything she'd touched at the garage. But as her eyes scanned the numbers and angles, something sparked inside her. This was her world: data, metal, logic. She began scribbling notes, her pen flying across the page. From a distance, Damon watched through the glass walls of the lab. He stood with his hands in his pockets, eyes locked on Emily. Carl approached him, speaking quietly. She's quick. I bet she'll catch the error before lunch. Damon didn't reply. He clenched his jaw. He checked her background the night before. Emily Lane, full scholarship to Riverside, top of her class sophomore year, dropped out for personal reasons. She was real, and that irritated him even more. He didn't like being challenged, especially not by someone like her. No degree, no status, but bold enough to look him in the eye and say he was wrong. He turned away, but one question buzzed in his mind. Who is Emily Lane, and what is she going to do next? The Vale Motors lab in Long Island was brightly lit under fluorescent lights, but the air felt heavy like a storm waiting to break. Emily sat at her small corner workstation, surrounded by the tapping of keyboards and the hushed voices of engineers. The new engine schematic was spread out in front of her, covered in red ink notes, small, dangerous mistakes she'd spotted in just 2 hours. A miscalculated pressure valve, a gasket that couldn't withstand high temperatures. Errors that, if left unchecked, could cause the engine to fail mid-drive. She pressed her lips together, wondering if this was a test or just the result of sloppy work from Vale's team. "Hey, garage girl done already?" A mocking voice rang out. It was Jake, the blonde engineer who'd called her Princess on her first day. He leaned against the desk next to hers, arms crossed, wearing a half smirk as if waiting for her to stumble. Emily looked up, her expression calm. "Almost. Found a few issues in the design. Want to take a look?" Jake snorted, glancing at the nearby colleagues now watching. "Issues? You've been here, 2 days? Don't tell me you think you're smarter than this whole team." She slid the schematic toward him. "The pressure valve here," she pointed, "is set at 120 pounds per square inch. But with this fuel flow, it'll blow before the engine hits peak RPM. And this gasket, it melts at 300 degrees Celsius. Who signed off on this?" Jake's face hardened, but he quickly masked it with a smirk. "You're criticizing a design that passed review by the council. Who do you think you are, Einstein?" Emily shrugged, unfazed. "I don't have to be Einstein to know it's wrong. Go ahead, check it, if you got the guts." A few quiet chuckles rose from nearby engineers, not at her expense. Jake flushed, grabbed the blueprint, and muttered something under his breath before turning away. Emily exhaled, diving back into her work. She knew she was being tested not just by Damon, but by the entire room. They saw her as an outsider, a girl with no degree, wearing jeans instead of a lab coat, and they wanted her to fail. At noon, Carl called her into a small meeting room. He laid her annotated schematic on the table, eyes a mix of surprise and satisfaction. "You were right about the pressure valve and the gasket," he said. "I ran a simulation. If we'd sent this to production, the engine would have failed within 500 hours. Good work, Emily." She nodded but didn't smile. "Thanks, but how did no one else catch these?" Carl sighed and sat down. "This team is talented, but they work on autopilot. They trust the software and the reports. They don't question things. You do. You look at the engine like it's an old friend." His compliment made her pause. She remembered those nights at Tommy's garage, fixing cars by feel and instinct, not billion-dollar software. "I just do what needs to be done," she said. Carl smiled. "That's why I want you to stay. But be careful. Not everyone likes being shown up." She knew he meant Jake, maybe even Damon. She nodded and left the room, pride and unease settling in her chest. That afternoon, a small disaster struck. A prototype vehicle in the lab suddenly shut down, smoke rising from its wiring. Engineers scrambled, running between laptops and voltmeters. Jake, standing closest to the car, shouted, "Somebody fix this! We've got investors arriving in an hour." Emily, working on a separate component nearby, caught the burning smell different from ordinary wiring. It was the smell of an overloaded connection. She walked over, ignoring Jake's scowl. "Let me see." "You," Jake scoffed. "This isn't your rusted Chevy, garage girl." She didn't answer. Instead, she knelt and examined the wiring beneath the dash. Just as she suspected, a soldering error had caused a power surge. "Give me wire cutters and electrical tape," she said, her voice firm. A younger engineer, seemingly less hostile, quickly handed her the tools. Emily snipped out the damaged wire, replaced it with a solid temporary splice, and wrapped it cleanly. "Try starting it now." Jake glared but followed her instruction. The engine roared to life, no smoke. The lab let out a collective breath. A few heads nodded her way, albeit reluctantly. Jake turned away, saying nothing. Emily returned to her workstation, but the sensation of being watched made her glance up. Damon stood in the doorway of the lab, hands in his pockets, eyes fixed on her. He didn't speak, just gave a subtle nod before walking away. She wasn't sure what it meant: approval, suspicion, or just another move in whatever game he was playing, but she knew one thing for certain: he was watching her every step. That night, after all the engineers had gone home, Emily stayed in the lab, double-checking her own designs. The soft light from her desk lamp highlighted the faint grease smudges on her hands. She heard footsteps and looked up to see Carl. Burning the midnight oil? He asked warmly. Just want to be sure, she replied. If I mess up, they won't forgive me. Carl nodded, sitting beside her. You know, I studied at Riverside too, like you. No scholarships, no support. I had to build everything from scratch. You remind me of those days, stubborn, but never giving up. Emily gave a faint smile. Stubborn's about all I've got. You've got more than that, Carl said. You've got talent. But that won't be enough here. You've got to play the game or they'll crush you, especially Damon. He doesn't like being challenged. She studied his face, trying to read between the lines. You think he wants me to fail? Carl shrugged. I think he wants to understand you. But Damon doesn't trust easily. You'll have to protect yourself. Emily nodded and turned back to her design. After Carl left, she looked out the window at the glittering city lights. These 7 days weren't just an opportunity, they were a battle. And she wouldn't let Jake, Damon, or anyone else make her feel like she didn't belong. But deep down, she couldn't help wondering, was she walking through a door to her dreams or straight into a trap? Still following the story? If this story found you outside of Soul Stories, we invite you home to where every touching tale begins with truth, hope, and heart. The Vail Motors lab was quiet on Thursday morning, filled only with the soft hum of the air conditioner and the whisper of Emily's pen skimming paper. 4 days had passed since she first entered the gleaming glass building, and she felt like she was walking a tightrope, every step calculated, every mistake a potential fall. The new engine schematic on her desk was now filled with notes in red ink, but today she wasn't just spotting flaws. She had discovered something much bigger, something that could destroy the entire project. She flipped through the calculation pages, her finger pausing at the cooling system. The specs clearly showed that the radiator couldn't handle the high temperatures under prolonged operation. If this engine went to market, it would overheat, possibly even catch fire. Emily took a deep breath, knowing this would not be easy to report. The engineering team, especially Jake, had already shown resentment toward her critiques. And Damon? She had no idea how he'd react. She knocked on Carl's office door, the rolled-up schematic in hand. He sat behind his desk, eyes on the computer screen. Emily, he said, offering a small smile. Found something else? She unrolled the design onto his desk, pointing at the cooling system section. This radiator isn't strong enough. With the engine's current output, it'll fail long before passing endurance tests. If we don't make changes, the vehicle could be dangerous. Carl frowned, pulling down his glasses to study it. He flipped through pages, checked the numbers inside. You're sure? This design was approved by the board. They ran simulations. Simulations aren't always accurate, Emily replied, her voice steady. I recalculated. The temperature exceeds safe limits after 3 hours of continuous driving. We need a larger radiator, or we need to redesign the airflow. Carl nodded slowly, but his eyes showed concern. You're right, but this is going to stir trouble. We're presenting to investors next week. Making changes now means production delays. Better a delay than launching a dangerous product, Emily said. I've seen this before. My dad worked for a company that didn't listen. One small error cost them everything. Carl looked at her, as if wanting to ask more about that story, but simply nodded. All right, I'll take this to Damon. But brace yourself. He doesn't take bad news well. That afternoon, Emily was summoned to the main conference room at Vail Motors, a glass-walled space overlooking the Long Island skyline. Damon sat at the head of the table, dressed in a fitted gray suit, his eyes cold as steel. Jake was there, along with 2 senior engineers, all watching her with guarded, skeptical expressions. Carl sat in the corner, silent but attentive. I hear you found another problem, Damon said, his voice even but sharp. He tapped his fingers on the table, each tap landing like a warning. The cooling system, right? Are you suggesting my whole team is blind? Emily stood tall, the schematic in hand. Not blind, just not double-checking. The current radiator isn't enough for the engine's output. I've got the data right here. She placed the blueprint on the table and slid it toward Damon. Jake scoffed, shaking his head. Garage Girl wants to teach us how to do our jobs. Do you even know how many simulations we ran? Or do you think you're smarter than a supercomputer? Emily glanced at him but didn't take the bait. She looked directly at Damon. Simulations rely on ideal conditions, but real roads, high heat, heavy traffic, they're not ideal. This radiator won't hold. I ran the numbers here. She pointed to the chart. Temps will spike past 400 degrees Celsius after 3 hours. Do you want your cars catching fire on the freeway? The room fell silent. An older engineer cleared his throat and flipped through her calculations, but Damon didn't touch them. He leaned forward, his eyes locked on hers. Who do you think you are claiming you know better than my team? You're a dropout working in a garage. Do you even have a degree, Lane? Any credentials? His words cut deep, but Emily didn't flinch. She took a breath, her voice low but resolute. I was top of my class at Riverside, Mr. Vale. I was analyzing engines before you graduated. And I learned one thing. Staying silent when you know the truth is the fastest way to destroy everything. I'm not here to grandstand. I'm here to make sure no one dies from a mistake we can fix. Damon blinked just for a moment, but enough for her to see that she'd surprised him. Jake opened his mouth to argue, but Damon raised a hand to stop him. You're confident, he said, voice lower now. But if you're wrong, you won't just leave here. I'll make sure no garage in New York hires you. Emily swallowed hard but nodded. If I'm wrong, you won't need to fire me. I'll walk, but I'm not wrong. Damon stared at her a moment longer, then turned to Carl. Run the simulation again. Use her numbers. If she's right, we'll revisit. If not... He didn't finish the sentence, but his glare said everything. She would pay the price. That night, Emily stayed in the lab, desk lamp casting a glow over her tired face. She checked the data for the 10th time, determined not to have missed anything. She knew Damon wasn't just testing her, he was waiting for her to fail. But she couldn't back down. Not now. Not after coming this far. Footsteps echoed, and she looked up to see Carl in the doorway, holding a cup of coffee. You should get some rest, he said gently. Tomorrow's going to be long. Tomorrow his team will tear me apart if the simulation doesn't match, she replied dryly. Carl placed the coffee on her desk. You remind me of Damon back when he was at Riverside. Stubborn, relentless. But you have something he didn't. Emily raised an eyebrow. What's that? The courage to speak the truth, even if it costs you. Carl gave her a small smile. He won't admit it, but he respects that. At least, a little. She studied him, unsure if she believed that. But when Carl left, she took a sip of the coffee, letting the warmth settle through her. She didn't need Damon's respect. She just needed to be right. And she would be right not for him, not for Vale Motors, but for herself, and for the people who could get hurt if she stayed quiet. She turned back to the numbers, eyes sharp. This battle wasn't over. It was just beginning. On Friday morning, the Vale Motors lab was thick with tension. The overnight simulation results, using Emily's data, were now displayed on the large screen in the center of the lab, and the entire engineering team had gathered around. Emily stood at the edge of the group, arms crossed tightly, trying to steady her nerves. She knew she was right, but the condescending glances from Jake and Damon's cold silence made her feel like she was on trial. Carl entered, holding a freshly printed report. His eyes scanned the room, landing on Emily before he spoke. The simulation confirms what Miss Lane identified. The current radiator is insufficient. If we don't make adjustments, the engine will overheat under real-world conditions. She just saved us from a disaster. A wave of murmurs spread through the room. A few engineers nodded, but Jake shot her a glare, clearly displeased. Emily didn't care. Her eyes were on Damon, who stood against the wall, hands in his pockets. He said nothing, just gave a small nod, but his gaze, sharp and unreadable, felt like a scalpel. All right, Damon finally said, voice low. Miss Lane, what do you propose? Emily took a deep breath and stepped forward. Increase the radiator size by 15% and improve airflow through the grill. I've drafted a preliminary redesign. She slid a drawing across the table to Carl, who glanced through it and nodded approvingly. Damon looked at the drawing, then at her. You work fast, but these changes will cost millions and delay production by 3 months. Do you think shareholders want to hear that? She pressed her lips together, steady. They'd prefer that over seeing your cars catch fire on CNN. A few soft chuckles rose from the team, but Damon didn't laugh. He tilted his head slightly as if weighing something. You're too confident, Lane, but fine. Carl, proceed with her recommendations. And Miss Lane? He paused, eyes locked on hers. Don't think this makes you a hero. She nodded, saying nothing. She didn't need to be a hero. She just needed to be right. That evening, the lab was empty except for Emily and her desk lamp. She was reviewing the new design when footsteps made her look up. Damon stood in the doorway, no suit today, just a white dress shirt with the sleeves rolled up. He looked slightly less intimidating, but his eyes were still sharp as ever. Still working? He asked, walking in and sitting across from her. Just making sure, she replied, not looking up. What about you? No parties with shareholders tonight? He chuckled softly, a rare sound that caught her off guard. I don't like parties, and I wanted to talk to you. Emily set her pen down and crossed her arms. About what? Did I mess something up again? Damon leaned forward, his gaze serious. I looked into your background. Riverside, full scholarship, top of your class sophomore year. Then you dropped out, because of your father, right? She stiffened, surprised at how deep he dug. That's none of your business. Maybe, he said, not breaking eye contact, but I need to know who's working for me. You've got talent, Lane, more than most of my team. So why did you walk away? Why choose a garage over the fight? Emily felt her throat tighten. She hadn't planned to talk about this, not to him, but his eyes weren't mocking this time. They were curious. My dad was scammed, she said, her voice low. A contractor promised him a big project, then vanished with the money. We lost the house. Everything. I didn't have a choice. Riverside doesn't cover debt. Damon stayed silent, but his gaze softened slightly. You could have deferred, found another way. She gave a bitter laugh. You've never had to choose between your dreams and your family, have you? My dad's a mechanic. Like me. He taught me everything I know, but he didn't have a degree, so no one listened to him. I couldn't let him lose everything because of me. Damon stared at her for so long she grew uncomfortable. Then he spoke, voice lower. My mother died because of a mechanical failure. A car, faulty brakes. I was 15. No one took responsibility. No one apologized. Emily blinked, stunned by his openness. She hadn't expected that from the man who always seemed untouchable. I'm sorry, she said quietly, unsure what else to say. Don't be, he replied, rising. Just keep doing what you're doing. If you're right, I'll listen. But if you're wrong, he paused, his eyes sharpening again. You know the consequences. He turned and left, leaving her in silence. Emily stared at the blueprint, but her mind was elsewhere. His words echoed his mother. The fault, the silence. She realized he wasn't just a cold CEO. He carried scars too. That night, Emily returned to her small Queens apartment. Her father was on the couch watching TV, a beer can resting on the table. He looked up and gave her a tired smile. How was today, kiddo? Those Vail Motors people treating you okay? She sat down beside him, slipping off her shoes. They're tough, but I'm hanging in there. I found a major flaw today. Might have saved their whole project. He nodded, eyes glinting with pride. That's my girl. But be careful, Emily. Big men don't like being proven wrong. She smiled, but her father's words and Carl's echoed in her head. Damon was watching her, not just because of her talent, but because of something deeper. He didn't trust her, but he was drawn to her, not romantically, but like a puzzle he couldn't quite solve. She lay in bed staring at the ceiling. 5 days at Vail Motors had changed her. She was no longer the delivery girl shrinking under judgmental eyes. She was Emily Lane, former Riverside top student, now fighting to reclaim her dream. But as she thought of Damon, his gaze, the story he shared, she wondered if she was walking into something far more dangerous than she realized. She closed her eyes, resolute. Whatever Damon's game was, she wouldn't let him win. Not tomorrow, not ever. On Friday night, the Vail Motors lab was quiet, only the soft hum of machines and the dim glow of Emily's desk lamp filled the space. She was finalizing the last draft of the new radiator design, her fingers gliding over the paper with laser focus. 6 days in this place had pushed her to the edge, skeptical glances, pressure from the engineering team, and Damon Vail's constant looming presence. But today, After the simulation confirmed she was right, she felt a flicker of hope. She was doing something no one had expected her to. The sound of light footsteps made her look up. Damon stood in the doorway, holding 2 paper cups of coffee. His gaze wasn't as sharp as usual. Dressed in a simple black shirt, he looked less like a powerful CEO and more like someone who just wanted to talk. "You're working late," he said, stepping in and placing one of the cups in front of her. Emily raised an eyebrow, not touching the coffee. "You're still here too? I thought CEOs had wine tastings or yachts to attend." Damon chuckled softly and sat across from her. "Yachts aren't my style, and I wanted to talk, not about work." She tensed, unsure what he meant. After last night when he spoke of his mother and she opened up about her father, it felt like some invisible line had blurred. But still, she remained guarded. "About what?" she asked cautiously. Damon took a sip of his coffee, his eyes drifting to her sketch before returning to her. "About you, about me, about why we're even here, arguing over engines like the world depends on it." Emily gave a faint smile. "Because it does matter. You know that better than anyone." He nodded, his expression softer, almost sincere. "True, but yesterday, when you talked about your dad, I got it. My mother—" He paused as if the words were hard to get out. "She was the only one who believed I could do something meaningful. When she died, I promised I'd never let a flaw slip past me again. But I was wrong. I let my team overlook things you caught." His admission caught Emily off guard. She studied his face for signs of insincerity, but saw none. "You're not the only one who's made mistakes," she said quietly. "My dad was the best mechanic I've ever known. But no one gave him a chance because he didn't have a degree. They laughed at him, called him a failure. I grew up watching that, and I swore I'd never let anyone make me feel that way." Damon said nothing, his gaze locked on hers. In that moment, there were no CEO titles or trial period employee roles, just 2 people carrying scars no one else could see. "You're not like them, Emily," he said softly. "You don't let anyone define you. I respect that." She blinked, surprised by the word respect. She wanted to respond, but her throat tightened. Instead, she took a sip of the coffee, letting its warmth calm the emotion rising in her chest. "Thanks," she said finally, "but don't think this makes me easier to handle." Damon laughed, an actual laugh this time, lighting up his face. "I wouldn't dare. You're the most stubborn person I've ever met." "Look who's talking," she replied, lips curving upward. For the first time, the air between them felt lighter, less adversarial, more like 2 people who might actually understand each other. They sat there talking about things unrelated to engines, stories from Riverside, eccentric professors, late-night project disasters. Emily told him about the time she fixed an old Mustang for Tommy using nothing but zip ties and duct tape, which made Damon laugh. He shared about botching a school experiment and having to apologize in front of his entire class. Small stories, but each one pulled them closer, like 2 lines finally converging. At 10 o'clock, Damon stood. "You should get some rest. Tomorrow's the last day of your trial week. I need you at your best." Emily nodded, gathering her papers. "You too. Don't stay up thinking of new ways to sabotage me." He smiled again, but his gaze lingered on her a moment longer than necessary. "I don't think I need to sabotage you, Emily. You challenge yourself enough already." He left, and she sat there with a cooling cup of coffee and a strange warmth in her chest. She wasn't sure what it was, affection, curiosity, or just the adrenaline from a wild week. But as she looked out the window at the sparkling Long Island skyline, one thing was clear. Damon Vale was no longer the enemy. He was a question, and she wasn't sure if she wanted to answer it. The next morning, Emily walked into the lab with mixed emotions. Last night's conversation had changed how she saw Damon, but she couldn't let feelings blur her judgment. Today was the final day of her trial, and she had to prove she belonged. Carl called her into a small meeting where the engineering team was presenting progress on the new engine. Emily was asked to give an update on the radiator redesign. Standing at the front of the room, her voice was clear and steady as she explained how the new system solved the overheating problem. Most engineers nodded in agreement, but Jake, as usual, interjected. This design will raise costs, he said, voice laced with sarcasm. Did you think about how we'll explain that to shareholders? Or are you just playing hero? Emily gave a calm, sharp smile. I'm thinking about keeping our cars from catching fire, Jake. But if you want to be the one explaining to investors why we sold dangerous vehicles, be my guest. A few laughs rippled through the room, and Jake fell silent, his face red. At the far end of the table, Damon didn't say a word, but the slight curve of his lips didn't go unnoticed. Emily felt his eyes on her, but she didn't look back. She focused on the report, answering questions with the confidence she'd earned over the past week. After the meeting, Carl clapped a hand on her shoulder. Great job, Emily. I'm going to recommend we keep you. Final decision's up to Damon, but I think you've proven your worth. She nodded, but uncertainty still lingered. Damon wasn't someone easily persuaded, and after last night, she couldn't help wondering if he'd let personal feelings affect his judgment. As she exited the meeting room, he called out. Miss Lane, he said, voice low, walk with me. She followed him to a balcony outside the lab, where the breeze swept across the open space. He leaned against the railing, staring at the skyline. You've done well, he said, not looking at her. Better than I expected. Really? She asked, standing a few feet away. I thought you wanted me to fail. He turned to her, gaze serious. I wanted to know who you are. Now I do. But the week's not over. Tomorrow I want you to lead a live test of the new engine. If it goes well, you stay. If it doesn't... He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't have to. Emily nodded, heart pounding. I'll make it work. He looked at her then, his gaze softer, as if he wanted to say something more but couldn't. I believe you'll try, he said quietly. Then he turned and walked away. Emily stood there, wind brushing through her hair. She wasn't sure what she was feeling, determination, anxiety, or something deeper that had begun to grow from the unlikely connection between her and Damon. But she knew one thing for certain. Tomorrow would decide everything, and she wouldn't let anyone, not even him, stand in her way. On the final morning of her trial week, the Vale Motors lab glowed with sunlight streaming through the tall glass windows. Emily stood at the control panel, fingers gliding over the touchscreen as she prepared the live test for the new engine. A small group, Carl, a few engineers, and Damon watched her from behind. She could feel the weight of their eyes, especially Damon's, who stood silently in the corner, with his arms crossed, his face unreadable. Today, she had to prove her radiator design worked flawlessly under real-world conditions. One mistake, and the entire week would be for nothing. She took a deep breath and started the engine. It fired up smoothly, and the screen displayed stable readings. Temperature, pressure, fuel flow, all within safe limits. Emily glanced at Carl, who gave her an encouraging nod. But when she looked back at the screen, a red alert flashed. System error. Abnormal data. The engine shuddered violently, then cut out. The lab fell into stunned silence. Jake, standing near Damon, let out a smug laugh. So that's it, garage girl. Your world-saving design just wrecked the engine. Emily felt the blood drain from her face, but she didn't panic. She scanned the control panel, reviewed the data. Something was off. This error had nothing to do with the radiator. She dropped to her knees and checked the sensors beneath the engine. One wire was loose with traces of adhesive clearly tampered with. Someone messed with the sensor, she said firmly. This wasn't a design flaw. This was sabotage. Jake stepped forward, voice dripping with sarcasm. Sabotage? Really? Blaming someone else to cover your failure? You're in charge of this engine, Lane. Emily stood and stared him down. I know what I'm doing, and I know this sensor didn't just come loose on its own. She turned to Damon, waiting for him to speak, but he just stared at her, silent and cold. Carl stepped in, his tone calm but serious. Emily, check it again. If it's sabotage, we'll investigate. But for now, fix it and rerun the test. She nodded, her hands trembling with frustration. She reconnected the sensor, verified every wire, and restarted the engine. This time, it ran perfectly, numbers clean, performance smooth. The room exhaled in relief, but Emily didn't feel victorious. Someone had tried to make her fail, and Damon's silence cut deeper than she expected. That afternoon, a security team email hit everyone's inbox. The new engine's technical data had been leaked online, along with a scathing article accusing Vail Motors of ignoring safety flaws. Emily was called into Damon's office. He sat behind his desk, his gaze sharp as a blade. "How do you explain this?" he asked, sliding a printout of the article across the desk. "This data was only available inside the lab. You're the newest person on the team, Lane. You have the most motive." Emily felt like she'd been slapped. "You think I leaked it? I'm the one who found the flaw. I fixed it. Why would I sabotage my own work?" Damon leaned forward, voice low and cutting. "For fame? For money? For revenge? I don't know, Lane. But you're the only one who had access and smart enough to do it." She clenched her fists, forcing herself to stay calm. "You're wrong. I didn't do this. And if you believe I could, then you don't know me at all." He stared at her long enough she thought maybe he'd say something to ease the blow, but he only stood and turned his back. "Leave. I'll investigate. But if you're involved, you won't just lose this job." Emily walked out, heart pounding. She felt betrayed not just by the accusation, but by Damon's cold silence. After everything they'd shared the night before, when he'd opened up about his past, and she had started to believe he trusted her now, she wasn't so sure. That evening, Emily sat in her small Queens apartment, eyes fixed on her laptop screen. The article was still spreading, and she'd just received a message from Carl. "Stay calm, I believe you. We're reviewing the security cameras." But his words weren't enough to soothe the ache. She thought of her father, how many times he'd been blamed for mistakes he didn't make simply because he didn't have a title. Now she was living that same story. She stood, pacing the room. She wanted to fight back, to prove her innocence, but she didn't have access to Vail Motors' security systems. All she had was her mind and her will. She opened her laptop and began reviewing every personal note from the past week, searching for any clue to who could have sabotaged the test. One name kept surfacing in her mind. Jake. He had always been hostile, always trying to undermine her. But would he really risk everything to frame her? A knock at the door startled her. She opened it and was shocked to see Damon standing there. No suit this time, just a hoodie and jeans. He looked less like a CEO and more like a man burdened with something heavy. "We need to talk," he said, voice low. She crossed her arms, not inviting him in. "Talk? Haven't you already decided I'm guilty?" He looked at her, conflicted. "I haven't decided anything, but I need to hear from you. The whole truth. If you didn't do it, give me a reason to believe you." Emily's emotions surged: anger, hurt, and something she couldn't quite name. She wanted to slam the door, but a part of her, the part that remembered him speaking of his mother, the part that had felt something shift between them, held her back. "Fine," she said, opening the door wider. "But you're going to listen. All of it. And if you still don't believe me, I'll find my own way to prove it." Damon stepped inside, and as the door closed behind them, Emily knew this wasn't just a fight to clear her name. It was a chance for him to see her, and for her to finally be understood, before everything came crashing down. Emily's small apartment in Queens was dimly lit by an old desk lamp. Damon sat in a frayed armchair, fingers interlaced, eyes fixed on her. The air between them was heavy. Every word felt like it could either shatter or mend something fragile. Emily leaned against the wall, arms crossed, steadying her voice as she recounted everything. From her first day at Vail Motors, Jake's condescending looks, to the feeling of being set up when the engine failed and the data was leaked. She held nothing back, not even her suspicions about Jake, despite having no proof. "You want the truth?" she said firmly. "That's all of it. I didn't leak the data. I didn't sabotage the engine. I came to Vail Motors to prove myself, not to destroy it." Damon stayed silent, his gaze scanning her as if searching for a crack in her words. At last he exhaled and leaned back. "I want to believe you, Emily, but the data was leaked from the lab, and you're the new one. Security checked, there were traces of access from your temporary account." Emily's heart sank. "My account? I don't even know the password to the main system. Someone used it to frame me." Damon leaned forward, voice low. "Who, Emily? Jake? Do you have proof, or is it just a feeling?" She pressed her lips together, frustrated that the truth was stacked against her. "I don't have proof, but you know Jake hates me. He didn't want me there, and he's smart enough to pull this off." Damon stood and paced the room. I can't act on feelings. If I'm wrong, I destroy the career of a loyal engineer. But if you're right, he paused, eyes locking with hers. I need time. The shareholder conference is tomorrow. I'll find the truth before then. Emily nodded, though doubt flickered in her chest. And if you don't, I'll be fired, right? He didn't answer, just looked at her with a conflicted gaze. Get some rest. Tomorrow will be long. He left, and she was alone with a sense of helplessness and a fragile sliver of hope that he truly wanted to believe her. The next morning, Vail Motors' shareholder conference was held at a luxury hotel in Manhattan. Emily was told to attend even if her role was simply a trial employee standing in a corner. Dressed in a white blouse and slacks, she tried to blend in with the crowd of investors and reporters. But she could feel the eyes, hear the whispers, the garage girl, the traitor, technical failure. Damon stepped up to the podium, clad in a sharp black suit, his voice steady through the mic. He spoke about Vail Motors' future, the new engine, their commitment to safety. But when a shareholder raised a hand and asked about the leak, the room tensed. We conducted a full investigation, Damon said, his gaze brushing past Emily for a split second. The leak was deliberate, and we've identified the perpetrator. Emily's heart stopped. She clenched her fist, bracing for the worst. But Damon continued, voice sharp as a blade. The one responsible is Jake Harper, my senior technical assistant. He used a new employee's temporary account to mask his actions. Security footage and system logs confirmed it. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Emily blinked, stunned. She turned to Jake, standing near the stage, pale and speechless. He opened his mouth to protest, but Damon raised a hand. Jake didn't just leak data, Damon said. He deliberately sabotaged the engine test to shift blame. His actions not only betrayed Vail Motors, but endangered consumer safety. He has been terminated, and we will pursue legal action. The room erupted in murmurs. Emily stood still, her mind spinning. Damon had found the truth. He had believed her. She looked at him, and this time, he looked back, his eyes filled with a sincerity she hadn't seen before. As the conference continued, Damon shifted topics. We've updated the design based on an internal discovery, he said. Emily Lane identified a critical flaw in the cooling system. Her insight saved this project. I studied at Riverside like she did, but I have to admit she's the one I wish I'd had in class. Applause spread through the room, and Emily felt her face flush. She hadn't expected public praise, least of all from Damon. She gave a slight nod, trying to hide the smile tugging at her lips. Damon closed his speech with a striking declaration. We will not work with any investor who opposes transparency or disrespects our team, including Ms. Lane at Vail Motors. Safety and truth come before profit. Some shareholders murmured in discontent, but the applause grew louder. Emily stood there, feeling a weight lift from her shoulders. She wasn't just vindicated, she was seen. After the event, Emily stood in the hallway, watching the crowd disperse. Manhattan's sunlight streamed through the grand windows. She was still processing everything Damon had not only cleared her name, but publicly honored her. His words, "She's the one I wish I'd had in class," echoed in her mind, making her heart beat faster. Damon approached, his eyes softer now, no longer the icy stare of a CEO, but something gentler, almost grateful. You okay? He asked quietly. She nodded, her voice hoarse. Thank you for finding the truth. He smiled faintly, for the first time looking truly at ease. I told you, Emily, if you were right, I'd listen. And you were. Before she could respond, a familiar voice broke in. Welcome to the team, Princess. Carl walked up, a wide grin on his face, pride twinkling in his eyes. He patted her on the shoulder, voice warm. You know, Emily, you're the first woman in Vail Motors history to be appointed as a lead development engineer. No one's ever done what you just did not in 40 years of this company's history. Emily blinked, caught off guard by the praise. She smiled shyly, hiding the warmth spreading in her chest. Princess? I thought you'd come up with a cooler nickname, Carl. He laughed heartily, shaking his head. Oh, you've earned that title, believe me. But don't let it go to your head. We've got work to do, and I'm betting you'll keep blowing us away. Damon, still beside them, crossed his arms, lips twitching into a smile. Carl's right, he added, eyes fixed on Emily. You're the first, Lane, and I hope not the last. She met his gaze, something stirring inside her, not just validation, but a deeper connection forged through everything they'd faced. So now what? She asked lightly, but with a hint of challenge. My trial week is over. Damon tilted his head, eyes glinting. You want to stay? We need you. I need you. She smiled, not hiding it this time. I'll think about it, but this time I want a real contract. No more trial runs. He chuckled, the sound echoing down the empty hall. Stubborn as ever. Fine, Lane. We'll talk. Carl clapped his hands, breaking the moment. There we go. I'll grab coffee to celebrate. You two, keep arguing. He winked, then walked off, leaving Emily and Damon alone. As Damon turned to leave, Emily watched him go, her heart pounding. She had won not just the case, but her own inner battle. She was the first woman to break the barrier at Vail Motors, and as she stepped out of the hotel into the brilliant Manhattan sun, she knew she had reclaimed something she thought she'd lost. Her faith in herself, and maybe, just maybe, something with Damon Vail. 1 year later, the early summer sun bathed the campus of Riverside Institute of Technology in golden light, casting shadows of old oak trees across the cobblestone paths. Emily Lane stepped out of the engineering building, her white student lab coat snug around her frame, holding the transcript she had just received. She had completed her final year, graduating at the top of her class, just as she had once dreamed before life pulled her off course. The scholarship from the Vail Lane Foundation, a program initiated by Damon Vail himself to support students like her, had brought her back to school without the burden of financial worries. She stood beneath the tree, inhaling deeply, taking in the scent of freshly cut grass and the crisp air of freedom. A year ago, she was just the grease-stained girl in a Queens garage, looked down upon by the world. Now she was a certified engineer at Vail Motors, the first woman in the company's history to serve as a lead development engineer on the engine design team. It hadn't been easy, the long days battling doubt, prejudice, and even herself, but every step had been worth it. Emily, a familiar voice called out. She turned to see Carl standing at the end of the walkway, a wide grin on his face. He looked the same salt and pepper hair, the Vail Motors jacket still snug on his frame, but his eyes sparkled as if seeing her succeed was his proudest moment. Congratulations, Princess. Told you you'd make it. She laughed and walked over to hug him. Thanks, Carl, but stop calling me Princess. I'm an engineer, remember? Oh, I remember, he winked. The first engineer to silence an entire boardroom. You're still a legend at Vail Motors, you know. They laughed together as Carl filled her in on the changes at the company, how Damon had restructured the engineering department, hired more women and recent graduates, all inspired by her story. He's changed a lot because of you, Carl said in a lower tone. But don't quote me. He'll deny it to his grave. Emily smiled, her heart fluttering a little at the mention of Damon. Over the past year, their relationship had evolved from fiery arguments to deep mutual respect, and then into something more. He was no longer the arrogant CEO who dared her to fix an engine in front of an audience. He was the man who stood behind her, who believed in her, and sometimes made her heart race more than she liked to admit. Speaking of Damon, Carl said, glancing toward the gate, looks like he's waiting for you. Emily turned, and sure enough, Damon Vail stood there, leaning against one of Vail Motors' newest electric vehicles, sunlight catching in his dark hair. He wore a deep blue dress shirt with the sleeves rolled up, striking the perfect balance between polished and relaxed. When she approached, he smiled genuinely, without walls, and it made her pause. Congratulations, Engineer Lane, he said, voice low and warm. I heard you topped your class. Not surprised at all. She shrugged, trying to hide her grin. Just doing what needed to be done. What about you? No shareholder meetings today. Damon chuckled and stepped closer. Not today. Today's about you. He paused, pulling a small velvet box from his pocket and holding it out to her. I have something for you. Open it. Emily raised an eyebrow, intrigued, and took the box. Inside was a finely crafted silver ring, set with a tiny stone shaped like a miniature engine, every detail, from the pistons to the camshaft, meticulously sculpted. She laughed, astonished. "When did you make this?" "It's been in the works for a while," Damon said, his eyes gleaming. "Designed by you, I took inspiration from your very first engine sketch at Vale Motors. I thought it suited you." She looked at him, her heart pounding. The ring wasn't just a gift, it was a declaration, a way of saying he saw her, not just as an engineer, but as someone who mattered deeply. "Damon," she began, but the words escaped her. He stepped in closer, so near she could catch the scent of his cedarwood cologne. "Emily," he said softly, "the world might forget a genius without a degree, but I could never forget you, not ever." She smiled, eyes misting. "You really know how to make a girl speechless, Vale." "Only you," he replied, and gently took her hand, slipping the ring onto her finger. It fit perfectly, as if it had always belonged there. He held her hand a moment longer, his eyes locked on hers, saying things words never could. From a distance, Carl whistled teasingly. "All right, you two keep it PG. I'm still here." Emily and Damon both laughed. The moment softened. She pulled her hand away, but her gaze never left his. "Thank you," she said softly, "for everything, for believing in me, for giving me a chance." Damon tilted his head, his expression tender. "You don't need to thank me. You earned all of it, Emily. I was just lucky enough to witness it." They stood there in the summer light, surrounded by the sounds of birdsong and students' laughter. Emily looked down at the ring, feeling its weight not just of metal, but of promises, of a future, of a new beginning. She had gone from a Queens garage to a Riverside graduation hall, from the girl they all underestimated to the woman who broke barriers. And now, with Damon by her side, she knew she was only getting started. She looked up at him and smiled. "Ready for the next project, Vale?" He grinned, his eyes shining. "With you? Always ready, Lane." They walked off together, leaving behind the shade of the trees and the memories of old struggles. Ahead of them lay a new road, unpredictable, but full of promise. And this time, they'd ignite it together.